This is the Tropic Pianist Gamers podcast, episode 33, Exploring Neurodiversity. This month, April, is Autism Awareness Month, and I wanted to explore that topic a little bit more. My guest this month is Emma Sales, who is talking about autism and ADHD for herself and her child, but I wanted to explore it on a personal level as well, because autism runs in my family. I technically haven't got it, but it's been suggested by a few networking friends I've met along the way that I may be autistic in some way or another. I'd never put much thought into it myself, but the topic of neurodiversity comes up quite often, and I do believe that I am neurodivergent. When I asked my husband about it, because he worked in a department that dealt with disabilities, autism and dyslexia and all sorts of things like that, and he said, well, what is neurotypical? Is anyone actually neurotypical? Maybe everyone's neurodivergent, and that made me think some more. He had a very valid point, I feel, because what is neurotypical? He describes neurotypical as someone who is average at absolutely everything, and there is no one in the universe that can be average at absolutely everything, so therefore no one is neurotypical. But of course, neurodivergency, like autism, there's a big spectrum from low functioning to high functioning, and I don't want to dig too deep into that because my knowledge isn't as wide as I would have liked it to be. But I do have two cousins. One would be described as low functioning autism, and the other one would be described as high functioning autism, and they're both in the same family, and their upbringing was interesting. It ended up putting a lot of pressure on their parents, and their parents, although they had help at home, they struggled to keep going as a couple, they struggled to keep going as a family, and they were always wishing for the respite. Now, from the low functioning cousin, they did get respite every now and again, but as kids ourselves, me and my brother, we were quite innocent to this, even ignorant if you may, and I was actually scared of the low functioning cousin because I didn't know what to expect from him. He had very unpredictable behaviour, and me being anxious, I didn't know how to react or how to respond, so I just kept away from him. The older cousin, who had Asperger's, I used to get along quite well with him when we were kids. We used to mess about a lot and get in trouble, but we understood each other on a certain level. But as we became adults, our minds diversified a lot. He kind of got stuck in his ways, whereas I got stuck in my anxious ways and wanted a way out. Today I found my way out of my anxiety disorder, but obviously I had over 20 years worth of experiencing anxiety and wondering why I didn't fit in anywhere. One of the suggestions now is maybe I was neurodivergent, and the reason that I didn't fit in was because I didn't have the help that I needed at the time. Of course, that's okay in hindsight, because as an adult you discover what help is actually out there, and back in the 90s there was no help. Everything was brushed under the carpet, especially by my own family. You didn't have mental health unless it was a very obvious display of autism, which the cousins couldn't avoid. But my brother and I weren't really considered to have autism at all, but neither of us really fitted into the crowds. I'd never discussed autism with my parents, nor my brother. Yet, as a networking queen of sorts, it came up quite often. Many topics are talked about when networking. If you get to know the people you're networking with, the conversations run deeper and more diverse. And it's interesting to meet other autistic people who attend networking events and sort of compare notes, if you will. So I've had numerous discussions across my networking hubs with different people about neurodiversity and autism and how it affects us as business women, and it's quite fascinating to learn the different ways of doing things, particularly with neurodivergence. So at the end of 2022 it was suggested that I may have ADHD, because how can one person not have one niche and be multi-passionate and be okay with that. Well, I'm okay with being multi-passionate. I have multiple niches and I've made them work for me because I'm someone who likes flitting between things. I'm someone who believes that I can multitask, though I was told by multiple business experts that it's impossible to multitask. All you're doing is flitting between things. The main concern with ADHD people is they do flit a lot, but they never seem to complete anything. They'll start passion projects and never complete, and they get frustrated and end up in an endless circle. What sets me apart from ADHD is, yes, I flit, but I actually complete things. I get stuff done. I've had that reputation for years. Of course, getting stuff done was driven by anxiety originally, but now it's fueled by the fact that I know it's my passion and it's something that I get up for every day and have the passion to want to do it. And that makes the difference to me in business as a successful businesswoman. But going backwards as a young adult, a teen and a child with no support around, not from the professionals, not from my family because they didn't really understand what I needed from them because I never dared to ask for help. I was scared of people. Looking back, I can see where I didn't fit in. Exams were the perfect example. As an adult learner learning Welsh in my 20s, I was astounded to find that there was so much extra support available. I couldn't stand silence in exams and I always struggled with exams at school, but I put my head down and tried to get on with it as best as I could. Yet for my GCSEs I only got 1 A star because I used a dictionary in the French. We were the last year that was allowed to use a dictionary before they took it off the curriculum altogether. I was very lucky in that sense, but to me that was the only reason I got the A star. My A-levels I didn't get a single A and my parents were disappointed in me. My mum actually said on A-level results day, I hope you're going to resit those A-levels. But I didn't because I'd got into my university of choice, and at that point my A-levels didn't matter because I was going to do the degree that I wanted to do in the university that I wanted to go to. So the point was moot there. But it didn't change the fact that I struggled with exams. My memories of sitting exams in school was being able to focus for a bit, but the silence would get to my head and I'd end up focusing on the ticking clock if there was a ticking clock. If there was no ticking clock, I'd struggle to focus and I'd be counting down the time, usually wearing a simple watch at the time. I'd be counting down the time until I could escape the room. When it got to uni, I chose the subjects tactfully so that I didn't have to sit any exams if I could help it. The end of first year I had to sit a couple of exams and I learned that you could walk out after the first so many minutes. So I remember one exam, I sat down, wrote my name, wrote a sentence and walked out because I couldn't focus at all. I didn't like the silence. Give me a piece of music to listen to and I could do any exam, but that's not how exams work. I didn't fit in. So as an adult learner in Welsh, I actually had a breakdown when they announced that there was an exam at the end of the course. The word exam completely triggered me, and as I burst into tears and got called out of the classroom to talk to the teacher asked if I was okay. This was a momentous occasion in my anxious journey because it was the first time I'd actually dared to ask for help. Through sobs I told her that I struggled with exams and I didn't know how I was going to tackle this exam. The teacher reassured me and said, "Don't worry, we've got extra support if you need it. How do you fancy having a separate room to everybody else? Would that help?" I was like, oh yes, it would definitely help. I was feeling so grateful at this point that this was an option offered to me. So I took it, and although there was still the expectation to work in silence, the first exam that I did actually had a reversing lorry for half of the duration of the exam, so I wasn't sat in silence. At the end of the exam, the invigilator apologised for the disruption it had caused, but I actually found it a soothing sound, even though it was a constant beep, because it was not silence and that mattered to me. The second Welsh exam I did a couple of years later, they knew that I wanted a separate room. I was offered extra time as well, but I didn't need the extra time, I just needed the extra space so I wasn't feeling under the pressure of being in a room full of other people who were tense and stressed about the exam. So I went to my separate room, and the invigilator was actually checking in on me fairly regularly, so I was able to have short conversations in between the sections of the exam. So that helped because, again, it wasn't silence. I didn't get a distinction the second time like I did the first time, but I got a decent pass. And the speaking test, which was my worst nightmare, I ended up doing my speaking test talking to someone who was also a pianist in the local area, so we ended up talking about music quite happily in Welsh, and I was confident. I actually felt confident then, even though that was a few years before I actually overcame my anxiety. The support was valuable. All I had to do was ask for help. If only I'd known that as a teenager or a young adult, I would have got so much further back then. The other thing that sticks out to me in my journey as a neurodivergent person is my working pattern. For 18 months of my working life, I had a full-time salaried job. It was across 2 departments. One was in the university and the other one was a private job, but both in similar direction. The university wasn't as strict in what it allowed people to view on their systems, so I'd be constantly on Facebook planning the next Nintendo North Wales event whilst working at the office, and as long as I got the job done, they didn't really mind. So I kept on at that throughout my year in that department, and I got a lot done. And even though my colleague who worked in the same office would occasionally catch me watching Facebook stuff, she never complained because I got the job done. I work that way now, whereas I flipped between things, even if it's just surfing Facebook and writing the next piece of magazine or doing the next podcast. I'm always flitting between things. I play games on my phone in between things as well, like the old Candy Crush that everyone used to play. Yes, I still play Candy Crush. Blame the husband. But even then, in the early days of my so-called career, I needed that ability to flit between things. In the private office job, the rules were stricter. They banned you from looking at certain websites, so I struggled to focus. But they were always sending me out of the office on errands to run, because it was a private housing office for the students, so I was expected to maintain the flats and check in on the residents and chase the bills that were owed and that kind of thing. It triggered my anxiety pretty much every day, but I lasted for 4 months in that job before I got bullied out of it by my colleague, who called me a loser for being a gamer and that I had no life. That job was over 40 hours a week. It expected you to be effectively married to the job. There was no time for a life outside of that job. But I'm glad I escaped that, because I had a life with Nintendo North Wales, the very gaming thing that he said I didn't have a life for. It's ironic, really. But even though I was supposedly with no life, I was there in the background planning every Nintendo North Wales event just to keep me sane from that office job where I was being bullied, and it kept me sane. I kept going because I had that to live for once a month. After that office job, it took me a few months to mentally recover from the trauma that I'd experienced being in that office. And when I set up as a piano tutor, I thought that was the only thing I was good at, so I settled on that and only put out that I was a piano tutor for a couple of years. It was only when I became the Tropic Pianist Gamer and I realised that actually I can do more than one thing, and my flitting brain came back. My self-development journey was very deep in the last 4 years, and I've done so much. But all of it has been through flitting between things. I'd often sign up for 2 challenges simultaneously and do both of them at the same time. I might not have got the results that I wanted from one of them, but the other one would always come good, and I'd work on the other one by following up with it later. But either way, I eventually got the results from all of the things that I learned and did over lockdown. And it shows, because it's 4 years later and I've implemented what I've learned, I've put the actions in, and that's what matters. So, I may be neurodivergent, but I use that to my strength. I use my way of seeing outside the box to my strength, and I use my creative streak to my strength. Whatever you're diagnosed with or not diagnosed with, whatever you consider your own mental state to be, you can still be whoever you want to be. You just have to find your strengths, not your weaknesses. And it is hard in a society that always tells you to focus on one thing and only one thing, because a lot of us are fighting against what society expects of us, so we can be our true selves. But know that that is okay. And my last question for you today is, are you neurodivergent too? I'd love to know. You can get in touch with me on any of my social media platforms with the tag @TropicPianistGamer. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening to my podcast today. Don't forget my guest is out on the 22nd of April, Emma Sales, talking about autism and ADHD and how she copes with it. Bye for now. This podcast episode is sponsored by Abigail Pritchard. Abby practices physical therapy at her clinic in Vellinhelly, on the outskirts of Carnarvon and in Colwyn Bay. You can find her Facebook page at Aphoria North Wales. Her speciality is musculoskeletal therapy, treating those with chronic and acute pain. She provides an array of treatments from acupuncture and other Chinese medicines to holistic and sports therapies. She is now planning on introducing EMDR to the clinic. EMDR therapy means eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It is a specific treatment to help you process and recover from traumatic memories. It is a comprehensive psychological therapy to reduce negative thought processes while boosting positive thought processes. It is a highly effective therapy treatment and a relatively simple process as experienced by the client. The therapy is rapid and the client is not required to remain in prolonged therapy sessions. Just 2 to 5 sessions can prove to have positive outcomes depending on the individual's requirements and presenting issues. This particular type of therapy can play a pivotal role for neurodivergent conditions, mental health issues and trauma. EMDR is an evidence-based therapy recognised by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE, and the World Health Organization, WHO, as a treatment for PTSD. The therapy is delivered bilingually in Welsh and English. It's available every Sunday between 9:30am and 3:30pm at the unit in Vellinhelly. For more information, contact Abby Pritchard on 07871 556 811.